Good morning, class. So today I want to talk about our simple little application, our startup app that is just a introduction to how to handle a form, how to input some information, how to process it, and how to output it. So this is the exact same application that we worked with in class. Some of you had some difficulty with it, so I thought I'd do a little online presentation and go over some things. So first of all, I went ahead and set this up. I didn't think I needed to show that to you. Again, it's just drop and drag. So, or drag and drop, I'm sorry. And so I have the labels X, Y, Z, and my text boxes listed with a button. Now, one of the things that I noticed a few of you had issues with is your text boxes, you need to be aware of their orientation. So if you think this is text box 1, 2, and 3, make sure that that's actually what they are. So when you click on the first text box, make sure it says text box 1 and 2 and 3. Some of you had these backwards, and that's why it wasn't working. So just make sure you always know what your controls are actually labeled. Okay, so when you first create this and you go to your form and all you have to do is click F7 to get to your code. When you get to F7 and you come to your code, this is going to pop up the public class form 1 and the end class. This is required. This is you must have this information. So whatever you do, don't delete this chunk of code. It's necessary for the class to work. Another issue that I saw some of you have was some of you renamed the form, the code form, something different from the design form. So it requires both of these to be the same. This is the front end, your code form, your design view, and this is actually the code that is going to make that form functional. So they must be named the same. That'll happen by default, but whatever you do, don't rename them. So yes, you could create a class, which would be an additional class, but that's not the same thing as this. This is a whole different thing. So don't rename it, otherwise it won't sync up and things won't work. Okay, so having addressed that, let's go ahead and do some coding. So when you're in here, the first thing you need to do is you need to decide whether you're creating a subroutine or a function. Now, you might as well go ahead and create your event handler. So I double click on the submit button, and you'll notice that the event handler comes up right away. Just like I said in class, you could write everything in here, but that's not what I recommend. So I go ahead and just bring that down, and go ahead and if you use a single apostrophe, it's going to tell the compiler that everything after the apostrophe is a comment. So here you would enter your comments. So I just usually type in my event handlers, and then any event handlers you create, just put them underneath this commented line. Okay, so now we're ready to actually code. So we'll just do, we're going to go ahead and just write a subroutine. So I'll just say submain. And you can see it automatically puts the end subroutine at the bottom. And so now we're ready to actually do something. So let's go ahead and declare some variables. And here I just declared variable x using the reserved keyword dim, which tells the compiler that what follows is going to be a variable, so the variable x, and I'm declaring it as an integer. So I'm going to go ahead and do two more, just like we did in class. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and demonstrate how to get the variable from a text box. All right, so the next step is to initialize the variable. So we're going to assign the variable x. We're going to assign the variable x to text box 1. The variable y will be assigned to text box 2. And since in our function, our application, we're going to use z as our output, we won't assign variable z quite yet. So right now what I've done is initialize the variables, and I have now declared them, declared and initialized the variables, and I assign them to something. So X is assigned to text, whatever is going to be in text box 1, Y is assigned to whatever is going to be in text box 2. So the next step then is to say, let's do something simple with our variables. Let's say we're going to multiply them. We're going to take a product. So we'll set, in this case, we'll assign Z, the variable Z, is going to be assigned to the product of X times Y. So now we have done something with our variables. Initialized them, then we assign to them. X is assigned to whatever's in text box 1. Y is assigned to whatever's in text box 2. Z is going to be assigned to the product of X times Y. And now we will output them. So in this example, I'm going to output the Z, the product of X times Y, to text box 3. So text box 3.text will be assigned the value of Z. And now all we need to do is place we need to call our subroutine. So we're going to call it from the event handler when the button's pushed. And now this piece of code is done. We've assigned the variables. We've initialized the variables. We initialized our variables. We declared our variables and assigned to them. We processed them. We did something with them. And now we're going to output them. And all of that's going to happen when we execute it with the event handler on button 1 click. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay. Text box comes up. Let's go ahead and just put in some numbers. Submit. And we have our product, just as we programmed. Now, what if one of the mistakes that I noticed that people did was they did this, and you get this exception. Okay, so what this means is that the what you entered in the text box was a null value, and so the reason that exception happens is because right here, when you assign X to text box 1.text, you're truly trying to assign a null value to X, or basically something that doesn't exist into X. And the compiler can't do that. So that's why you get that null value when that happens. So yes, there's something we can do about that, and we will do that here in one. So like I said in class, one of the things I want you guys to focus on is your code to be very modular, very user-friendly, and easy to troubleshoot. So one of the ways we do that is we constantly try to do modularity with our code. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a second subroutine that's going to handle the input validation. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's call it val input. That makes sense. So we have a second subroutine, and this one's going to handle the validation stuff. So in our case, we know we're looking for numbers, so we're going to go ahead and use the Visual Basic reserved keyword, which is IsNumeric. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use probably a case statement. So I went ahead and created this subroutine sub-val input, and I still have the sub do something. I created it. I changed it to sub do something versus sub main, and it has the same code that we entered before. So our initialized variables, our text boxes, our processing, and then our output. The only thing I did is I changed this to do something versus main, and I changed the private subroutine to the event handler to execute val input, which doesn't exist yet, versus do something. So those are your changes. This is what your code should look like now. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to validate our input. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create some new variables, and I'm going to create these as Boolean. And the reason I'm creating these as Boolean is because remember I told you when you have something that's just a dichotomy 0, 1, there's no other options, to keep it as simple as possible, to use as little as memory as possible. We always want to be efficient in our coding. So there we go. And now we're going to I'll explain this code here in a minute. My dog in the background making noises. I don't know if you can hear him. Okay, so I usually just copy paste whenever I can and then just change a few things. It makes coding fast. All right, so what I did here is I created a couple of new variables. They're Boolean because it can either be true or false, can't be anything else. I called one TB1 for text box 1, TB2 for text box 2, and then I checked TB1 to see if it's numeric. So the keyword function that we're going to want, a built-in Visual Basic function we want to use is called IsNumeric, and it just checks to see if something is numeric or not. So we're going to pass it testbox1.text to the function IsNumeric, and it's either going to return true or false. And then we do the same thing for text box 2. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a test to see what's what. So we're gonna do that right now. And we need, in this case, we also need an else statement. So let's I'll explain all this code here in a minute. Okay, so what I did was I created this subroutine called val input, and it declares a couple of Boolean variables, declares them and initialize them. I use the keyword IsNumeric to check and see if what's there is either numeric or not numeric. If it's numeric, it'll return true. If it's not numeric, it'll return false. I check both text boxes. Then I create an if statement to say if text box 1 and text box 2 is true, then do the next, then call the next subroutine, which in this case is going to be do something. If it's not true, then I want to alert the user that they need to enter a valid number. So that means that either text box 1 or text box 2 contained an invalid number. Now the next thing I probably want to do is I want to reorder these so it makes a little bit more sense. And so I'm going to cut this and I'm going to stick it up on top. I mean, technically you could put this wherever you want. It's doesn't really matter, but for my purposes I like clean code, so and there we go. Okay, so the event handler, when the button's pushed, calls val input. Val input is on top. We initialize these two variables. We check them to see if they're numeric or not, and then if they are, then we call the subroutine do something. Do something comes down here, calls this subroutine. Subroutine does our processing, initialize some new variables, gets the information, processes the information. In this case, we're going to multiply the two inputs and get the product, and then we're going to output the product to the text box. Okay, so let's see what happens. All right, we have our little application. If I just click submit, it says enter a valid number. Cool, doesn't blow up. Let's say that I enter 1 and then push it again, still wants a valid number. Great, let's enter 2. Well, now we have our product. And if this was 12, 24. So there you have it. A nice working, simple little application demonstrating how to use 2 subroutines, well, 3 if you count the event handler, but using the IsNumeric function to test for a numeric value inside the text box. And that's it.